This is crazy how fast the time has flown by. We are finally at baby number 5, my last birth story in the series of birth stories until this one's born. But like I said, it's insane how fast the time has just flown by. I have 5 weeks of the pregnancy left. This has been so much fun to just reminisce and go through all these stories, and honestly, it's super helpful for me prepping myself to get ready to go through labor again and have another baby. So I've been loving it. At this point, all the pregnancies just kind of ended up being the same. No complications whatsoever, except for the fact that I had yet another subchorionic hemorrhage again. I found it at about 11 weeks, and it wasn't like, it was a really big hemorrhage, but I wasn't bleeding a lot. About 17 weeks, it cleared up, the hemorrhage was fine, I was doing great. Everything else was fine. All the levels were fine. Blood pressure, everything perfect. And during this pregnancy, after the hemorrhage had fixed, I had in my mind set that I wanted a home birth. Like, I just was gonna make it happen. At 37 weeks, I had my prenatal checkup appointment, and my doctor, she walks in, she's like, "Hey, how you doing? You're doing great. Everything's great." And I'm like, "Yep, still pregnant. Gonna go over." She knew at the time I'm planning the home birth. She was really excited for me, everything right. Everything up to this point has been going fantastic. I lay down and she goes to measure my belly, and like, as she's measuring it, she's just sitting there. Then she looks at me and she goes, "Why do you keep doing that?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Why does your baby just stop growing at the end of your pregnancy? You were doing so great." And just like with the last pregnancy, at the end, baby, belly, whatever, just stops growing. So she's like, "Okay, let's just send you into an ultrasound appointment today, because we just to make sure." Like I said, at the time, I was 37 weeks, baby belly was measuring 35 weeks. So I go in, get my ultrasound, and the baby's measuring 34-ish, 35. So they were like, "Okay." And then they had me go in for an NST. He wasn't doing really well on the NST even at that point. So they scheduled me for an induction the following week when I will be 38 weeks. When I walked out of that appointment, honestly, you'd think that I would be so excited, so happy that I had an induction date set. I was going to meet my baby. Everything was going to be great. But honestly, I was so just devastated. I was heartbroken because all of my thoughts and ideas and planning for having a home birth completely just gone. Just gone. Everything that I had mentally prepared for and gotten myself pumped up and ready for, it was over, and I wasn't going to be having a home birth. I knew the exact date of my baby's birthday a week before he was born, and it took everything out of all the exciting things of home birth and anticipating when it's going to happen, when is his birthday going to be, and all of the exciting things like that. It just was gone. It just gone. After that, because I had left work to go to the appointment, and when I had come back to work, I was bawling so much I couldn't even go back in, because I was like, I don't want to do this. So I remember I went to my mom and I was like, "Hey," and when I walked in, I had composed myself as much as I could, and then when I walked in, all I could get out was, "Hi, Mom," and then I just start bawling, and she's just like, "What is going on? Is the baby okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't get to have him at home." And she was like, "Okay." All of the pregnancy hormones and everything. So she talked me through that. But it was a long week, because every other day I had to go in for NSTs, and he increasingly just got worse and worse. His heart rate just kept dropping. It took longer each session in the NST to get him to pass so that they would let me go home. Honestly, I think the reason they had me wait to the full week to induce was because that was the first available day. Apparently it was a busy time for everybody and they were all having babies. That was the first available time, and so they were just keeping an eye on the baby. And during that week, I was prepping myself to be able to have a good labor. And I should, disclaimer, I guess, I know that not every labor and delivery, hospital experience, whatever, aren't like mine. I understand. I'm very thankful and blessed that mine are so easy, so quick, so bing, bang, boom, get in, get out, get it done. So like I said, I know that it's not all like that, but I myself credit a lot of why it is so easy for me to the way that I prep myself before I have a baby, before I go into labor. sorry. I can't breathe. Okay. Typically for me, the last 2 to 4 weeks, I go walking a lot. Not necessarily to start labor. I know that walking is not going to start labor. Your body's only going to go into labor when it's ready, obviously. But I walk a lot during the end of the pregnancy because it gets the baby in a really good position, and then it helps like even the progress of dilating and everything happen a lot faster before I have to go in and be induced. So during that week that I was prepping and getting everything ready for my induction date, which, by the way, it was a lot nicer to know that my induction date was a week later rather than that very same day, because it did give me time to go home and get his clothes ready, get the bassinet ready, get everything ready, car seat ready. Everything was ready this time. My house was clean. Everything was in place and ready to go. So I will say that was really nice, having the induction date set for a week later so that I could be prepared. The day of my induction, I woke up that morning and I got my kids to the babysitter, and the induction was scheduled for about noon-ish if they had a bed ready at the time. Like I said, the hospital was super, super busy at that time. So I spent that morning just cleaning everything, and I walked some more. I got everything ready, like the finishing touches, just everything spick and span and perfect so that I was ready to go. At about 10:30 or 11, I was mopping my kitchen floor and like going hard, just mopping it hard. My phone was in my room and it was on vibrate for whatever reason. After I mopped the kitchen, I come back in my room and I look at my phone and I have 3 missed calls from the hospital. And I'm like, no, oh crap, I think I missed it. So then I call him back and I'm like, hey, I missed some calls. And they were like, yeah, we were calling to tell you that we had a bed available and we were ready for you to come in. And I was like, shoot, now what? Like, what do I do? And they were like, it's full. You missed it. So try to call back again at about noon or 1 o'clock. And I was like, dang it, like, oh, we were so close. So then I stopped cleaning because I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna have that happen again. Turn the phone completely on full volume. I go take a shower and I start getting myself ready. At about 12:30, I call them like they told me to, and I ask them, hey, do you have a bed available? And then she says, not quite, call back around 1. So I wait for a little bit, call back at 1, and she's like, yeah, it's ready. You might have to wait a little bit when you get in, but it should be good to go. I get all my stuff packed up and ready, and I call Wade and I'm like, hey, you gotta come home. They have the bed ready. Come home and come pick me up, and then we'll go up to the hospital together. So I had all the bags packed this time. I was so ready this time. Everything was just perfectly set up and ready. So we head up to the hospital. It takes us a while. I get checked in and the nurse, like, I try to be really nice, but the nurse, she goes to put my IV in. Where does it go? It goes on the top of your arm. I don't even know. I think it was like, it doesn't matter. She's putting my IV in, and then, like, as she's doing it, for me, I can't watch when needles are going in. It doesn't bother me too bad when it's happening. I just can't watch it happen. So I'm, like, not looking, but I feel her just twisting needles around in my skin, and I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, I just can't quite get the vein. Sorry. And I'm like, oh my, ow. Then she's like, do you mind if we try on the other arm? So I'm like, okay, whatever. So she pulls it out and I look and I had this big bruise on my arm where my arm is all swollen because apparently she blew the vein, and she's like, oh, whoops, sorry, let me try on your other arm. And I'm like, okay. So she goes in the other arm, she gets it placed, and we're good to go. They check how far dilated I am, and I'm at a 3 already. Thank you for walking, because that's what did it. With this labor, like I said, I had planned the home birth from the very beginning. So when I realized that it was going to be a hospital induction, I had in my mind set, I'm not going to get the epidural this time. I had it with the 2 last babies. I want to feel something that makes me feel like I'm actually birthing a child. So from the very beginning, I told my doctor, I don't want the epidural. I want to go in and I want to try it by myself. But if I cave, you have to give it to me. And I remember telling Wade this, like, help me go through this, try to get me through it, but if I cave, if it hurts that bad, let me have the epidural. And when we got in, the baby wasn't in a good position to break the water at the time, so they started off with the pit, just a very low dose. I'm sitting in the bed, and I had asked them originally, can I sit in the tub during contractions? But because I was hooked up to the IV in the pit, they didn't want me in the tub. So I was like, this is a bummer. I don't know how I'm going to make it through without an epidural, but we'll try. I'm hopeful. So I'm sitting there, and they've started the pit, and I feel like I am I'm just waiting for the pain. I'm so nervous and anxious for what the pain is actually going to feel like that I'm just sitting there. And I feel a contraction or something start tightening, and I'm like, okay, is this it? Is this it? Is this it? Like every time that I feel something. So then I'm like, oh, okay, I'm good. And then each time that it happens, I'm like, okay, this is it. This is it. Oh, no, it's not. I went through that for about an hour. After an hour, I asked the nurse, can you turn up the pit? Can you break the water? Can you do something? At this point, like I said, I was just so anxious to feel what it was going to feel like so that I could prep myself to handle it. Like it's a mental game. And because I couldn't remember what the pain felt like, I just needed to feel the pain so that I could decide if I could handle the pain or not. So I asked him, can you turn on the pit? Can you turn it up higher? Like what can you do to start getting things going? So then the doctor comes in and she checks, and now the baby's moved in a better position. I haven't dilated anymore. So she breaks the water at that point, and then the nurse turns the pit up. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything, like it's feeling great. I have been sitting there for about 15 minutes since the water's been broken. I don't feel anything. I know that there are contractions that are happening, but I feel fine. I feel great. This is going good. And then all of a sudden it just hits. I feel everything. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, this is it. Yep. That's what a contraction feels like. Okay, yeah, I remember now. So I'm like trying to breathe through it, and I have my mom there, I have Wade there, and I have my birth coach that I had at my first 2 births. And as soon as that contraction hit, I was like, okay, yeah. So I'm in my mind going, what do I do during a contraction? I can't remember what I'm supposed to do. I think I'm supposed to breathe. I think I'm supposed to like not tense things. I can't remember. So I'm sitting there going, waiting for the contraction to be done, and then as soon as it's over, I look at Wade and I go, I did it wrong! I can't remember what to do during contractions! And my mom's sitting there, and my birth coach, they're like, calm down, and I'm like, it's real, I feel it, did you see it on the chart? It went up! Like, now it's starting. So I'm panicking, thinking, okay, now I remember what the pain felt like. It hurts really bad. I'm getting all anxious for the next pain. I'm talking to everyone at the same time. I'm talking to Wade, I'm talking to my mom, I'm talking to the birth coach, and I'm saying, I can't remember what to do. And so I look at Wade and I'm like, you're supposed to make sure that I don't tense, right? Like, that's your job, that's what you're supposed to do, right? And I look at my birth coach, I'm like, do I count to 10? What do I count to? I can't remember. What do I do? And then I look at mom and I'm like, don't you find a happy place? How do I do that? And I'm trying to figure out what method am I supposed to do? And then it's too late. Time runs out, and then the next contraction starts. So then I just don't do anything, and I'm sitting in my mind, freaking out, going, I can't remember what to do. And I'm hoping that Wade's like watching my face and making me not tense, because I know that that's going to help me progress faster. So I'm sitting there, breathing through the contraction, just going through it. And then as soon as the contraction is over, I come out of it and I'm like, I forgot what to do. You guys, help me. Do I count? What is the method that I do? I can't remember what to do. And I look at Wade and I'm like, I think I tensed. I think you didn't catch it. I'm pretty sure I tensed. I don't know where, but I'm pretty sure I did. I freaked out in between each contraction. For me, I'm thankful. I'm lucky, don't get any back labor. But my labor pains start in the belly, and then the pain just radiates down into my legs. Like my thighs just hurt. Everything just hurts. So I look at my mom and my birth coach and I'm just like, my legs hurt. Why do my legs hurt? What do I do? So then they're like, it's okay. During each contraction, we'll just push on your knees against them and then it will help alleviate or, help the pain. So then I'm like, okay, do that. Make sure that you do that every time that I start a contraction. Then just like be right on that. So then I close my eyes and I start breathing, and then they start pushing on my knees. So then in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, that feels better. I think I'm not tensing. And then as soon as the contraction's over, I come back out and I'm like, okay, I think I'm getting the hang of things. I calmed down significantly. I go through a couple of contractions like that, and in between each contraction, then my mom and birth coach would start talking and Wade would start talking, and then as soon as the contraction would start, then everyone would just shut up and then do their job. So I remember after one of the contractions, I looked at them and I was like, you guys, don't do that. Don't just stop talking, because now I feel awkward and like everyone's just staring at me waiting for the contraction to end. So I'm like, just keep talking during the contractions and I'll feel better. After I had said that, my mom and birth coach start talking and they get really into a conversation and a contraction starts. So I'm breathing through it and I don't feel them come and push on my legs. So I'm like, where are they? It hurts. So I'm going like that during the contraction, trying to get someone's attention. I'm like, right here, but I don't want to talk. because it's going to break my concentration. So I'm sitting there snapping at them, waiting for them to push on my knees. And they're like, oh, sorry. Start pushing on my knees. And I'm like, okay. Breathing through those contractions. At this point, I had been laboring for about half an hour with these really strong contractions, and my mom and birth coach pushing on my knees during each one. It's about 5:15 p.m. and I ask the nurse, can you check me to see how far I've dilated or how far I've progressed? She's like, okay, you're at a 5. And I haven't seen my doctor up to this point yet. And I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? Like, this hurts really bad. I don't think I can do this. And then I have another contraction hit. So then like I said, silent, just breathe through the contraction. And then as soon as I come out of the contraction, I look at Wade and I'm like, I can't do this. This is too hard. It's going to get way harder because I'm only at a 5. As soon as I get up to the 8, 9, 10 part and have to actually push a baby out, like, I'm scared. I don't think I can do this anymore. So he's trying to cheer me on because I asked him to, and he's like, you can do this. And then another contraction hits. So then I'm like, okay, shh. So I breathe through it and then go through that, and then I come back out of it and I'm like, I really can't. I made up my mind. I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. So I look at him and I'm like, please just tell them to go get the epidural. And so he looks at the nurse and then another contraction hits. So I'm like breathing through it and I hear him kind of talking to the nurse and telling her, I think she wants the epidural. So the nurse says, okay. And then so she steps out of the room. At the time, I didn't know what was happening, but she called my doctor and she was like, hey, your patient wants the epidural. Should I call the anesthesiologist in? My doctor said, no, she doesn't. She told me she wants to do this without the epidural. She has fast labor. She's close enough. Let's give it a couple of contractions and we'll see where she's at. I'm on my way down to go check on her. So I come out of the contraction and I'm like, is it on its way? Like, where's the epidural? And I'm, like I said, panicking, thinking, I give up. I can't do this. This is way too hard. It's way harder than I thought it was going to be. So I'm asking him and I don't know what is happening, but nobody's answering me. Like, I'm like, where is the epidural? And nobody is saying anything. So I have a couple more contractions and then my doctor comes down and she's like, hi, how's it going? And I'm just like, it's good to see you. Can I have my epidural now? And I'm like trying so hard to stay composed. And she's like, okay, just let me get things set up and I'll check you. So I'm like, okay. Another contraction hits. So then they start pushing on my knees. After that contraction, she checks and she's like, you're doing great. You're at a 7. And I'm like, only? Apparently it had only been about 15 minutes. At this point now it's like 5:30. So I had progress. I'd made pretty good progress. But in my mind, I'm thinking like, this is really hard and I'm done. So then at this point, I look at her and I'm like, can I have the epidural? Like, can somebody get it for me? And then she looks at me and my mom looks at me and my birth coach looks at me and they're like, it's too late. In that moment, I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smack somebody. I was so afraid because at this point, there was no turning back. I had no safety net. I couldn't cave. I couldn't be like, I don't want to do this anymore. There was no backing out of it, basically. And I had to just keep going. So the amount of fear and pressure and anxiety that I was like, oh no, now I have to actually keep going through this. So then I'm sitting there and I'm like trying not to panic. So then another contraction hits. And again, during each contraction, I did so good. I just sat there and I just breathed and I tried to keep my entire body calm. And then after each contraction, during this point, when I knew that I couldn't get the epidural, I would look over at Wade and be like, this is so stupid. I can't believe I did this. Why did I think I could do this? I can't do this. Like, what am I doing? Who let me? Who let me do this? Why didn't we get the epidural at the very beginning? Like, panicking, and then the next contraction would hit and I would just be quiet and then sit there and breathe through it and be super calm. And then as soon as the contraction was over, I looked at my mom. Why? Why did you tell me I could do this? I can't do this. This is so hard. Finally, I went through like 2 contractions like that. Then my doctor checks and she's like, you're at an 8. And I'm like, I can't do this. So then after I found out that I was at an 8, then my mom looked at me and she was like, you're almost done. And she like got right up in my face and she's like, you can do this. You don't have a choice. You have to do it. So just just keep going through that. The next contraction hits, and during that contraction, all of a sudden I feel like the need to push, and my body just starts doing it, and I couldn't stop it. And I knew I was at only an 8, so I was like, oh, you can't push too soon, you're gonna ruin things up there. So in my mind, I'm trying not to push, but at the same time, my body just is pushing. So then after the contraction's over, I look at my doctor and I'm like, why do I feel like I need to push? Like, what is happening? So then she checks and she's like, you're at a 9 now, after that one contraction, but the baby is sideways. So she was like, you might need to get up on your hands and knees. We might need to change your position. So I'm like, okay, trying to get ready to, but then the next contraction comes and I'm like, can we do it after this contraction? And she's like, yeah, go ahead. So then the contraction hits, and then as soon as it hits, the same thing, only now my body's like actually pushing hard. So then I'm trying to stay calm and breathe through the contraction, and my body just starts pushing. So I look at my doctor and I'm like, I'm pushing. What is happening? So then she checks and she's like, oh, you're at a 10 and the baby just turned. Go ahead and push. And I was like, okay, great. So I like just give it everything that I've gotten. I just do one big hard push, and then she goes, wait, stop. And I'm like, you said I could push. And like, it's hard not to push. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, trying to breathe through it. And she's like, the baby's right there. And I'm like, can I get it out? Can I push? Can I just do this? And then my birth coach gets up in my face and she's like, okay, remember this part. This is the part where we just go slow. So I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting there and I'm like trying not to do anything. And then my doctor's like, okay, just little teeny tiny baby pushes. And I'm like, how do I baby push when everything in me is just saying push hard? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, whoo. She's like, okay, yeah, just like that. I do that for a couple of breaths, and then finally at 6:04 p.m., Roman Lehi was born, weighing 6 pounds, 7 ounces at 19.5 inches, just perfectly sized baby. Just everything was perfect. They gave me the full 1 hour skin to skin time, and nobody took him from me. That's honestly my favorite part of having a baby, is that I think they call it the sacred hour, where it's just me and my baby. I'm a very selfish mom. I will admit. When I push a baby out, that's mine. That's my baby, and nobody is taking that baby from me. So I absolutely love just having an entire hour that I get to just hold my baby. The experience of pushing a baby out, feeling it, everything, feeling labor, contractions, delivery, after not feeling it the past 2 babies, it was honestly the best feeling in the entire world. There's nothing that compares to there's not even words that you can put to the emotions, but just feeling I did it. I went through labor. It was hard. It hurt really bad, but the satisfaction that you feel, I mean, nothing can compare to it. All right. So that was it. 5 kids, 5 labor and delivery stories. I am so beyond excited to be able to add one more story to this series of birth stories. We're done. We did it.